You may wonder why we're talking about social entrepreneurship here at Reunion. The number one reason is Jay Langheier called me and said we should do this. And so Jay helped assemble this great group of panelists. So we're going to spend 30 or 40 minutes in a conversation and then turn it over to all of you for any questions you might have. I'm going to hold off on defining what social entrepreneurship is and ask the people who on the ground live it every day. It's kind of like impact investing and ESG. If you ask people what that is, if you ask 10 people what impact investing or ESG is, you'll get 10 different answers. So I'd love to hear directly from all of you how you live and talk about and breathe social entrepreneurship. The other reason we're here is that Williams, I think, uniquely educates our students to be social entrepreneurs. And the liberal arts education, just given all the necessity for critical thinking, for pivoting, for dealing with failure, for all the things you need to do, and to have a vision. I think the education that we all received here and students currently receive set us up well for social entrepreneurship, although out of college, probably not, and we'll talk a lot about, maybe out of college, how many students even think about it as a career. It's a giant industry, $300 billion in the US, $2 trillion globally. Again, it all depends how you define it. There's 1.3 million social enterprises in the US, and if you think about it broadly, about a third of them traditional nonprofits, a third of them for-profits, and a third kind of hybrids, public benefit corporations, B Corps, et cetera. And it's growing very rapidly, 45% growth in the number of social enterprises in the last 5 years. So I'm going to go to each one of our panelists here and ask them two questions. The first question, first I'll tell us who you are, and then your definition of social entrepreneurship and how you or your organization is engaged in the pursuit. Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lani Willmar. I'm class of 2015, and I run two organizations, Ethos Admission, which is a college access and readiness organization, and Ethos Pathways, which is a climate justice workforce development organization. I grew up low income first gen, and I had the amazing opportunity to come here to Williams through the Questbridge Foundation. And when I was crossing that graduation stage 10 years ago, I thought to myself, did I do enough? Did I do enough to take advantage of all the resources here in this special, magical place? And I'm coming back 10 years later to change the question a little bit and reframe it. And now I'm asking, did I do enough to give back to this place that has given me so much? Berkshire County is one of the poorest counties in Massachusetts, which not a lot of people actually know. It's very easy to forget that in the Purple Valley. So I'm back here doing my social entrepreneurship work in a way where I define it as building bridges so that other people can have the option of going to various places too.
Great. Thanks, Lani. Eric.
I'm going to answer that question by telling the story of my organization. It took us 22 years to build our organization, and it took the Trump administration a few days to tear it down. Upon taking office in January, the administration moved immediately to end foreign aid. On January 20, the president issued an executive order freezing foreign assistance, and the new administration ordered implementing partners like us to stop work. Elon Musk, in fact, called the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the world's largest bilateral aid agency, a, quote, criminal organization, and vowed to, quote, feed it into the wood chipper. And claiming he had reviewed each one individually, Secretary of State Rubio ordered the mass termination of 5,200 USAID programs, which is about 83% of. At Democracy International, the impact was swift and devastating. We were forced to lay off almost all of our 400 global employees around the world, and to terminate virtually all of our programs. Practically overnight, we went from a thriving organization doing important work in dozens of countries to having 2 remaining overseas programs. But what I want to talk about today is how moments of crisis can become moments of opportunity, and how the principles of social entrepreneurship, adaptability, resilience, and mission-driven innovation have guided us over 2 decades. We began with a simple idea. It was in the late 1980s, a colleague and I saw that international democracy assistance, which is a field that was then less than 15 years old, needed better analytical tools and evidence-based opportunities and evidence-based approaches. We had both been working in this space since the early days, but we saw an opportunity to help design more effective programs. My path into this work started unexpectedly. I'm a lawyer. In the 1980s, while working at a large law firm, I took on pro bono cases in Namibia, and that led to an opportunity to support Namibian transition to independence in 1989, and suddenly I found myself in a completely different career working internationally in democracy and human rights. We formally launched Democracy International in 2003 as an analytical firm focused on democracy and governance. As entrepreneurs entering the extremely competitive world of government contracting and grant making, we initially didn't know what we didn't know. But we learned how to win funding, adapted quickly, and found early success providing analytical services to USAID. Over the years, we've had to reinvent ourselves several times. In 2008, for example, when established organizations backed out of monitoring elections in Pakistan, the US government asked us to step in. This was a potentially dangerous environment as well as a politically challenging one, but we saw an opportunity. The Pakistan mission led us to transform ourselves from a mostly analytical firm to one that was doing long-term development programs in the midst of conflict. We began working in Afghanistan in 2009, continued there for most of the next decade. We expanded into long-term programs in Bangladesh, South Sudan, Egypt, and eventually dozens of countries, working on everything from monitoring elections to advising political parties, preventing youth violence, and protecting human rights defenders in danger. Three key things drove our success. One, evidence-based innovation. Building on our analytical roots, we've always emphasized the importance of research and evidence to improve international democracy, human rights, and peace programs. Some years ago, for example, we recognized the value of drawing on insights from social and behavioral sciences, such as behavioral economics and social psychology, to improve international development program outcomes, and since then we've invested heavily in behavioral research and capabilities. So in Kosovo, for example, we were using insights from behavioral science to strengthen the social contract between citizens and local government. Second, localization. We've always believed in respecting and building up local partners, and where appropriate, deferring to local priorities. Among other examples, we've worked as a subcontractor to local organizations in Georgia, Kenya, Pakistan, and elsewhere, something that's rare among U.S. implementing organizations. To increase sustainability and effectiveness, we helped organizations in those countries to lead on setting priorities, implementing programs, and directly winning international funding. Third, adaptability and resilience. We have been flexible and resilient. Several times over the years, as in Pakistan, we had to reinvent ourselves to build our business and take on new challenges. We've always rolled up our sleeves to do what we needed to do rather than what we wanted to do. We adapted enough to survive the first Trump administration. We've dealt with countless crises in countries that we've worked in. We've learned that moments of crisis can be moments of opportunity, which brings me back to today's crisis. The sudden termination of programs has caused immense damage, leaving human rights defenders vulnerable, stopping emergency assistance to refugees, interrupting violence prevention programs. The abrupt U.S. withdrawal has ceded enormous political influence to Russia and China. Our organization has been gutted. Together with other USAID implementing partners, including the American Bar Association, we filed suit in February in federal court. A federal judge agreed that the dismantling of USAID and mass termination of foreign assistance likely violated various laws and the constitutional separation of powers, and ordered the government to rescind the program terminations, pay for completed work, and restore funding in accordance with congressional appropriations. The government attempted an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but by a 5-4 margin, the Supreme Court upheld the order. Unfortunately, the government has dragged its feet on making payments and essentially ignored the court's order to restore funding. The case is currently on appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and may make its way back to the Supreme Court. But we're not just waiting for the courts. As soon as programs were terminated, we pivoted looking for new funders and clients. We're aggressively exploring new lines of work. We want to survive so we can help restore international development aid and democracy promotion. The jury's still out on whether this will work, but our adaptability, resilience, and hard work will increase the odds. I'll stop there.
Thanks. Adriana Roman, class of 20.
Hi everyone. My name is Adriana Roman, class of 2020, which was a tough year. And I think it really translated to how I even got into this entrepreneurship startup space. So for me, let's see, social entrepreneurship, I've learned, can come from many different angles. And so to try to encapsulate everything, I will say that the entire system and ecosystem is how I like to define bits and pieces that make it social, impact driven. So for example, when I graduated from college, I knew I liked entrepreneurship because I worked at Goodrich Coffee Bar, which, not sure if everyone's familiar with Goodrich Coffee Bar, but it's the student-run campus, or it's the student-run coffee shop on campus. And I began working as a barista because I had a work study, and then eventually was a manager and didn't know what student-run meant until I was in that position and realized, oh wow, like the fact that we're operating every single day was a miracle. But I was infatuated. I ended up pretty much dedicating my entire senior year managing the student coffee bar. And so I remember I asked one of my mentors on campus, he was actually part of the career services here at Williams, his name's Tonio Palmer. Dear mentor, he actually recently passed away, and so I think about him when I'm on campus, but he was the one that kind of started to define entrepreneurship for me, and I realized I really like this, I really want to go into this. So after college, I joined a fellowship called Venture for America, which targeted emerging startup hubs across the US, but cities that didn't have traditional capital, which meant that, VC firms or just any kind of funding wasn't dedicating those cities enough capital or also just talent. So I really resonated with that mission and worked at an ed tech startup in Philly and just became entirely in love with startups and then branched out into the ecosystem. And so now for me, having some experience working in startups, understanding certain elements of the fundraising, finance side of things, to me, social entrepreneurship is how do we unlock access in all of those areas in actual startups, talent, capital, resources for entrepreneurship and founders. How do we make that more accessible for others who haven't traditionally had a part in that, and allow for the system itself to change, but it's across different angles, and so that's what social entrepreneurship means to me.
Thanks. Jason Langheier, class of 00.
Hey guys, thanks for being here, and I hope you're all having a great reunion. It's an honor to be here with people who have both supported me. Greg was our first investor in Foodsmart, one of the businesses that I've worked on, and people I admire like Steve, and getting to know like Eric and Lani and Adriana, and really appreciate what you're doing in this moment, Eric, and I couldn't agree with you more that part of social entrepreneurship, Greg, I think the definition is that you don't just quit when, oh, it's not the most profitable thing, I'll just pivot into another thing. If you haven't solved the mission and the issue you're working on, you pivot and you keep working on it. And I think that is a fundamental difference from a lot of other just quote straight up entrepreneurial endeavors. But I'm a physician after I was at Williams, where I had a chance to start med school at Cambridge my junior year abroad, because Williams is so awesome and flexible. But I studied neuroscience here, and I went on to get my medical degree at Duke, and my degree in my master's in public health, and focused on nutritional epidemiology at Harvard. But long before that, I started a pediatric obesity clinic at Boston Medical Center, and it was a really pivotal experience for me because I grew up on and off food stamps in rural Buffalo. My mom says that all the chronic disease in our family comes from stress eating too many chicken wings from 4 straight Super Bowl losses. For all you Patriots fans here, jerks. But jokes aside, I enjoyed living in Boston during lots of victories for lots of Boston sports teams. But I had 3 aunts and uncles with strokes in their 50s. My godmother, aunt, and neighbor died of diabetes very young. And back then, that all just seemed normal. And when I came to Williams, I, honest to goodness, thought it was odd that there were 85-year-old grandparents visiting, because none of my grandparents made it anywhere close to that. And then I started to think, I guess I was poor, which is really nonsense, because back to Boston Medical Center, I met kids who were morbidly obese, diabetic at 5 years old. And I I realized what real poverty was. It's a lot different than growing up low income on and off food stamps. It also made me really appreciate what my parents did for me. Dad was a mechanic, and we'd go on food stamps just when he got laid off from his job, and the fact that there was public assistance like that my mom could use to help us and try to help us not struggle through obesity and other challenges as a family, it made a big difference. But these kids, they didn't have that support. But just with a little bit of love and support, what we did is personalize a grocery list for not just the kids, but the parents, who often struggle with obesity themselves. And we would make sure that they could afford healthy food and learn how to buy it, even if it took a grocery shopping tour to do it. But this is the kind of stuff that these are amazing pediatricians that are at Boston Medical Center, they didn't do. So when it worked really well and we reversed insulin resistance in all but a few kids, the primary care doctor said, I wish we could provide food scripts to the kids. Maybe Amazon can start delivering food, not just books, because Webvan went out of business. This is circa 2002. I would really want to scale this to all kids who are overweight and obese before it becomes the stage of diabetes and foot amputations at age 30 or 40. That's now happening in the real world instead of 60 and 70. I've started a number of different businesses in the digital health field where you can really focus on trying to solve a problem that all of our amazing hospitals haven't solved, that our public health system hasn't solved or might even be getting worse right now as we speak, as government pulls back in different areas. But I think that's the hopefully positive thing we kind of leave with today, and that Williams has started to and continues to invest in, is that in this era of AI, which is both wonderful and scary at the same time, and this area of government pulling back, it's actually people that go to places like Williams who have this broad view and broad education and broad set of creative ideas that faster than ever with things like AI can implement their ideas to have a profound impact. And earnestly, since I left Williams, I've been able to create the most used cancer decision support in the world, mostly because it's bought by US Oncology and McKesson, but that's made a big difference. The most used nutrition counseling platform in the country, and certainly the most used ever by Medicaid members, which is most of our business. And because my friend got really sick with ALS, was able to help him found a company called Synapticure, which is now the largest teleneurology and neurodegenerative disease business in the US. But it's because of amazing supporters like Greg that helped, because I just had a passion coming out of a place like Williams to want to make an impact, and so many other mentors along the way. And I'm really grateful that Williams is starting to think a little bit like Stanford and others, but with a very special view on how can people coming out of a liberal arts education like this build businesses that scale and are valuable and have impact, and how can they do it from the vantage point of solving a problem first and foremost, not just having the best high growth and high margin P&L.
Before we go to Steve, Jason, you can tell obviously is very accomplished and a great leader and a great salesman. So I would, and in the positive, so I don't know how many times, Jason, you call, give me a speech like that, updating me on the business, and things are going great. Which is, by the way, payroll hits on Friday. And I'm just wondering, can we send you wiring instructions? But that's being an entrepreneur. Steve Case, class of '80.
Speaking of the class of '80, I see a number of people from our class. I'd just like to once again highlight and celebrate Greg Avis, who won this prestigious award today for all he's done for Williams. We're all super, super proud of him. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking of a few Williams stories, which tie in with this concept of perseverance. First of all, I applied to Williams for early decision and got waitlisted. I didn't think I was quite up for it. And I also worked on a number of businesses here. And at one point, there was actually an editorial in the Williams Record criticizing me for doing entrepreneurial things on a liberal arts campus. So we've made great progress on since then. And I'd also, to further, I guess just get this out. It's a form of therapy, perhaps. When I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, my job I wanted was with Procter & Gamble, and they were interviewing on campus. and they rejected me. So I appealed that. Eventually they hired me. And I also at the same time wasn't quite sure, so I applied to business school and got rejected from everybody in business school as well. So that's part of my Williams experience. The lesson there is really one about, kind of perseverance and kind of sticking with it, and eventually, you're able to, do some things. On a positive side, my senior year, I became transfixed with this idea of the internet. I read a number of books at the time, one by Alvin Toffler called The Third Wave, and there were a lot of experiments happening with video text and teletext and so forth. And so back then, when we were still on campus, some professors did note that it would probably be better for me to spend less time on concerts and less time on my internet exploration and more time on my homework. And I think in retrospect, they had a good point. But that's when I really became fascinated with the idea. And obviously a few years later started America Online and did that for a couple of decades. In terms of the social entrepreneurship question, just two examples. One is my wife Jean is here as chairman of National Geographic, has been doing that for 10 years. They're a great example of social entrepreneurship because the organization started well over a century ago and has a really interesting mix of what people would think of as nonprofit, a lot of grant making, raising a lot of money to fund those grants, a lot of businesses, including the magazine and cable channels that generate revenue that then allow for further expansion of the grant side of things, and very significant advocacy on policy issues all around the world. Trying to protect the oceans with the Prestige Seas Initiative and many other things. And that to me is the key with social entrepreneurship. As you said, Greg, it's not any one thing. It's how do you use all the kind of the things in your quiver to try to have the best possible impact. And usually the one that has the most impact is sort of a hybrid solution. It's not just this or that. It's a combination of several things.
Great. Obviously, a common theme going through all of you, and Jason teed up. What's happening in the current environment? Eric, a great example of government pullback. You talked about AI. What's happening in the current environment that either increases the risk and/or the opportunities for social entrepreneurs to be successful today? Anybody want to start? Jason, you want to start?
Yeah, I think there's actually two forces, and I think the opposite end of risk is always opportunity. And I think I already alluded to AI. Honest to goodness, it takes me about a week to do things that once took me about 6 months to do on my own. Back in the early days of starting my first nonprofit, Fitness Forward, when I would cut my own designs and code and PHP, and it took me a long time. I was never a very good programmer, but I was able to do it. But back then, I even had my own server in my office. Obviously, a lot's changed with things like AWS, et cetera, the internet before it. But, there's a lot of gloom and doom about AI that I think is appropriate to think through. And a dear friend of mine is thinking through the philosophy of that really well. But I think on the positive, as a social entrepreneur, I can now start to build things. I'm doing that first at Foodsmart. I stepped down as CEO after 15 years, and we sold majority control to TPG Rise, which is one of the largest social impact investors in the US and in the world. And they've been a great partner so far, but I found it difficult to build some of the next generation personalized food care plan features, especially for low-income families, that we wanted to build, because I was doing back-to-back Zoom meetings, and it's a huge responsibility to be the CEO, which I really loved doing for 15 years. But I had an opportunity to have the COO of the second largest telemedicine company join us as our CEO. He's a wonderful human being, and we've built a fun partnership. And now I'm able to do all kinds of things, such as we also have an AI dietitian that can meet with people in between visits. And now I tie that to government and all kinds of controversial things we could talk about. But I'll just talk about the thing that I love most coming out of Williams, which is always taking a moderate view on things and always finding opportunities for partnership, no matter how extreme the polls get. And man, has it gotten pretty extreme between liberal and conservative and all the things as of late. And yet, I've spent a lot of time in DC lately, and there's people like Mehmet Oz, who actually, dear friends with one of my classmates, Jeff Roizen's dad, Mike Roizen, Cleveland Clinic. A lot of good Williams people at Cleveland Clinic. And they help build chair care and do other things. And if you strip away the politics, Dr. Oz is actually working harder than most CMS directors have in a long time on a lot of specific reimbursement issues related to, food care. Now, I'm on the board of Partnership for Healthy America and really appreciate Mrs. Obama and President Obama and the work they've done and Let's Move and so many things. And from the outside looking in, it looks like you just can't mix Democrats and Republicans anymore. But the truth is, there's infinite opportunity, and if one group calls it social determinants of health and another group calls it MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, but behind closed doors they can agree on pretty much everything about what needs to get done, then we should work with people and figure out how to get it done, the moderate folks that actually really care about driving the ball forward. So I think that's the other piece to go with AI, is that on the one hand, and I think there's so many things that are bad about what's going on, and I really feel for you, Eric, but also appreciate you for leaning into the challenges. And at the same time, I think a lot of times people want us, and understandably, we all kind of want to stick our head in the sand a little bit, but it's actually in those moments of chaos that sometimes you can kind of not only get the most done, but have a responsibility, especially being so lucky to go to a place like Williams, to go have an impact on more than ever and faster than ever before.
I'd
Thanks.
just add on the government point, I saw this early on with the early days of the internet, even when we started AOL 40 years ago this summer in 1985. Back then only 3% of people were online. They're only online an hour a week, so it's pretty early days. But a number of government decisions essentially unleashed the internet and ensured that America led the way. Including funding via DARPA, Defense Agency, more than half a century ago, the core technologies that created the internet, and then doing a series of things in Congress to basically make sure that the telephone companies had to have open access and not just have closed networks, and a judicial decision with Judge Green to break up Ma Bell into multiple companies, which created competition. A whole series of things happened that basically unleashed that. So the early days of the internet were, there was a close connection with the government, which is maybe where my Williams political science major actually helped. The second phase, the second couple decades, the second wave, if you will, of the internet, the government was really on the sidelines, and most of the entrepreneurs, most of the investors were doing things that really didn't have to engage in government. And the general view was, if you're in Silicon Valley, you don't want to engage with government. You don't even want to enter businesses like healthcare, which were regulated because it's too hard and too expensive, takes too long, et cetera, et cetera. What's happened the last decade, and it's now accelerating, is almost all the interesting, significant opportunities to build companies, again, whether you're starting them as a founder or investing in them as a backer, are in areas like transportation, like financial services, like agriculture and food. You can go down the list, where it's regulated. And so as a result, people are starting to learn a new skill, which is how do you engage on the policy side. You may not want to, it may be frustrating. Decisions can get made that could really either accelerate the growth or stifle the growth. So it's complicated, but I think there's much more engagement now, and I think you'll see a lot more of that in the next decade. And the last point I'll make, it ties in a little bit with the AI point. Obviously, there are a lot of things, a lot of reasons to be concerned about AI and some of the impacts in terms of bad things happening, job loss, and so forth. I don't want to diminish that. But another way to look at it is, in a world where machines are doing more and more things, what are the skills that are pretty resilient? And AI could, kind of take away some of them, but there still will be a value to a human being doing it. And I think a core of that are what we think of as liberal arts skills. Things around critical thinking, collaboration, communication skills, creativity, they all happen to be C's. The AI is starting to encroach in some of those, but particularly collaboration, I don't think ever will. And one example of this, we worked on a project last few months, all these design charrettes for an interesting project we're working on. Took a lot of people over a lot of time. 2 or 3 weeks ago, with 2 of the different models, basically typed in a fairly brief query and got back 10 minutes later 2 pretty thoughtful 40, 50-page reports that had about 90% of what we talked about in it. And my initial reaction was, maybe we didn't have to spend all that time and money because we got to the answer. But then I realized that that's not really what moves change. It's not getting the answer, it's getting other people on board to work with you to execute the answer. And that can only happen if people feel more bought in. An experience I had merging AOL and Time Warner, which was a disaster in a lot of respects, was we knew where we wanted to go, but we didn't get people on board in terms of culture and priorities and so forth. So that's why it stumbled. So in a world with AI, where AI will do more and more things, number one, some of the liberal arts skills, which in the last 10 or 20 years were often criticized, like who would ever need like English or major in philosophy? Everybody should be coding. I think now people are realizing, hey, these models are doing a pretty good job on coding. Maybe they're not going to do quite as a good a job on some of the things that we think as liberal arts schools, which should strengthen the Williams hand and the importance of colleges and universities like Williams in a more technology-driven, AI-driven world.
Great. Lani or Adriana, you want to build on that as more recent grads about liberal arts skills and what's going on in the world today and how that affects your organization and your work? Okay.
Yeah, I work with a lot of young people, environmental justice high school students in particular, and the way that Ethos Pathways came to life is 80% of my first student cohort was based in the Berkshires. We were looking at different colleges and programs, and when I asked them what they were interested in studying, I assumed a lot of them would say pre-med, CS, really popular majors, and all the students in the Berkshires actually said, we want to do something climate-oriented. And we don't know exactly what that looks like, because it kind of changes every day. There's new technologies that come out all the time, but we have grown up so close to the earth in this beautiful community. We're watching it change, and we have no control as teenagers right now. We have a lot of climate anxiety and nothing to do with it. So of course, if there's anything we can study, it's going to be something climate oriented. And as we looked at different programs, there's all kinds of things students could be doing. You could work in sustainable operations. There's environmental science, of course, but then there's also this concept, environmental justice and climate justice, which is what happens when climate change changes communities themselves. So that is a very, very liberal arts kind of question. It's a cross-sector conversation. So those are the sort of conversations that we're having right now as an organization with our students. And I don't know if I would have this sort of experience without having gone to Williams and interacting with people who were studying all different kinds of disciplines. I don't know if I would be doing this kind of work if I wasn't a Williams Mystic alum. So I think that liberal arts backbone has really shaped who I am as a social entrepreneur.
Adriana, you want to build on that? And you also said something in your prefacing remarks about also bringing about systemic change, and versus focusing on what you do and your operation, your organization, and then as a result of success there, systemic change happens. You want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, that's a really good observation, because I think for me, a lot of what the liberal arts education has done is do that intersection, find those common points. And I think having had the wonderful opportunity of not really knowing what entrepreneurship or startup was, I was able to see everything both as just like singular data points, like first working at a startup, and then I first started as a customer success manager, but what does that really mean at a startup? You're like a little bit of everything, which I feel like everyone on the stage can understand. And so being more of a generalist, but then focusing on the gaps was where I think I saw that like possibility for change. And so I, loved my experience building, was obsessed with it, and then eventually wanted to, I actually worked at Williams for a little bit while I was transitioning to my next opportunity, where we were doing a pilot incubator program with a couple of students who were interested in pursuing entrepreneurship, but obviously in a closed environment, a lot of opportunity to explore. And I realized, whoa, like working at one startup is cool, but imagine working at supporting founders, right? Like you're starting to have a multiple effect. And so I really reflected on that and started to see, okay, there are patterns that a lot of people face when they're first starting their first company. And so I moved on to more of like the crowdfunding, but ecosystem builder kind of role, where I worked at a place called I Fund Women, and we focus on crowdfunding, but also like networking and just building community. And that showed to me similar things, but also very different problems that were common across any sector, any stage, particularly more early stage. And eventually I came up to realize, oh, the fundraising element is really difficult for a lot of people, everyone, but specifically those who come from underrepresented backgrounds. And so I'm someone that's motivated by a lot of things, but I think injustice / just fury is one of the things that definitely gets me going to the next place that I have to go. And so now I'm looking at things from an even like larger perspective where I'm like, okay, how do we get more investment to all of these innovative, different founders, but also that are tackling very real problems? And I think intentionality, locality, like knowing where your environment is, like being very observant of one particular problem and being able to actually have access to resource capital to be able to implement that. And so to kind of think about the current system or the current climate, I've noticed that people are very scared to invest in different things and like in things that are risky, because people are specifically investors who I've recently had the opportunity to work with a few funds are requiring more from founders before writing that first check. And while I think that's understandable, I definitely have seen like the hindrance of innovation, of tackling really big problems that have an impact on people, but requires a bit more convincing. And so it has brought about, to be a little bit on the lighter side, a chance for communities to collect. And so I've noticed more people going into community-based financing, and so they're looking at, okay, like I need to build something. I still want to make this happen. And so what do? I talk to other founders, I make new connections, and while you're not getting large checks from one or two people, you are getting smaller amounts of size, but by a lot more people who are invested in you, your idea, see the vision. And I think that's a really, really exciting space that I would love to see grow, or just looking at alternative forms of financing. And so part of me is like, oh, like I wish everything could exist at the same time and work together. I'm definitely very excited for what has come about, the current way that I've seen things change.
I'm going to ask one more question and then take some questions from all of you. You talked about risk. One of the criticisms of liberal arts, back to what Steve was talking, is that it prepares us to not take risk. And Steve, you were taking risk very early on as an entrepreneur here at Williams. Every one of you has taken risk in your career. Some of you very early. Eric, later in your career, you did a very risky venture, as you're finding out now. You want to talk a little bit about how you think about risk and how it's changed, your perception of risk has changed over time?
By the way, it's incredibly daunting to share a stage with my classmates Steve and Greg, on this kind of a topic, given what they've accomplished in their entrepreneurial activities. You have to take risks to make things happen. In order to try to really accomplish something, you've got to take some risks in doing it. And those can be career risks where you try to start something up. They can be challenges that you take on in your organizations. I think I've been lucky to have had the opportunity to do that. In my case, in terms of starting an organization, it helped to have a partner. It was because I found somebody who had a different personality and had a different way of looking at the world and was willing to sort of kind of jump in there and do something different. It made it possible to do it. I don't think I could have done it by myself. I don't think I had the right personality for that. And I totally agree with the point that Steve made earlier about collaboration, the importance of finding people who are committed to something, to doing good in the world, to being willing to work hard and cooperate, and don't have so much ego that they're only willing to do certain things. I think that kind of risk is really important, and it's been worth it. It's been fun, and I think now there were a lot of the risk that we're facing in our industry right now is how do you deal with what used to be your funder is now hostile to your enterprise? How do you deal with that? And the reaction of a lot of organizations early on, and maybe to this day, in international assistance was to sort of put their head down, try not to get in trouble, worry about backlash, worry about what was going to happen if they complain too much. You see that in law firms who have been challenged by the administration, and some of them have tried to negotiate to say they'll do pro bono work for silly things and not take on what's clearly an illegal assault on what they're doing. And I think we decided that it made sense to find other organizations that were willing to take the risk of standing up to the administration, because what they were doing was violating the Constitution, was illegal, and was having terrible effects on people around the world, as well as, of course, our whole field. And we're proud of that. Whether it works, it will take time to know. I mean, but in this difficult time, it is going to require people to sort of take some risks to stand up to that. So that's the risk that we're dealing with now, or that's certainly a prominent one.
I just add on the risk point, two things. One is, I'm not sure liberal arts necessarily creates a risk aversion, because I think it exposes you to a lot of different things. And I think the other skill set that's going to be increasingly valuable, which again is a little counterintuitive because for a couple of decades it's been like hyper specialization, do one thing really well. I think in a world that's changing rapidly and technology is playing more of a role, knowing a little bit about a lot of things and figuring out how to think differently and creatively and then drive collaboration is going to become critically important. Now that sort of is a liberal arts skill. I think what is a challenge for Williams and many other places is that Williams students have been taught, encouraged by parents, teachers, others, to be on a path to get straight A's and do all other. So they're reluctant to take a class they might be interested in if they don't think they can do really well in it. So that part of it, I think, creates some risk aversion. But I think the overall kind of skill set, I think, is going to be increasingly valuable, and people are more willing to think out of the box, more willing to kind of lean into a problem, think about it in a faceted way. So I think that aspect of it, I think, is something to think about.
And building on both those comments and what Adriana said earlier too, Greg, you and I talked about some of this. I mean, there is no question that AI is going to reduce the number of entry-level jobs for white-collar workers and even for people coming out of Williams. And I agree with what Steve said. I think you kind of get here. I even felt a victim to this a little bit. I was like, I did really well my first semester and I wanted to keep doing well. And then I took Religion 101 and kicked my ass, but it was really good with H. Gans Little, a really wonderful professor while he was still with us. It was really challenging and makes you think outside the box. Like you said many times, Steve, you get pushed into thinking differently in liberal arts than, say, when I was in med school where I was just memorizing things. And I feel like more than ever we use those skills when we kind of have these new technologies and AI and things like that. But getting back to risk, maybe the scales are going to tip a little bit because maybe there won't be as many of those Goldman and McKinsey jobs, which, by the way, wonderful training grounds. I was a consultant after college. I'm really grateful to that opportunity. But maybe on the positive, there can be encouragement to take on entrepreneurial opportunities, especially social entrepreneurial opportunities, because now you can build businesses easier, use your liberal arts background, weave ideas together, because you know a little math, and you know a little science, and you know a little English, et cetera. But also look at these problems and say, don't just think someone else is going to solve them. And there's great joy and satisfaction that comes from solving hard problems. And when you wake up on a Monday and it feels risky as hell and hard or even painful, which it often does when I have to call Greg and ask for help with payroll, but then you get to the other side and your business has been growing north of 200% for 5 years and 20% EBITDA and having a lot of impact more measurably than even, sadly, we have a data set bigger than my mentor's data set at Harvard, and they just cut his funding, even though they publish more papers on nutrition than anyone else in the world for years. That's like, it's mixed feelings, opportunity, it's risk, but it's something we should do. And you talked about funders and then places like Williams. I think what I have found that has made the biggest difference for me in terms of risk is mentors and investors or backers, which are a form of mentor in a way, all throughout the spectrum. You know, Greg helping me really early, but all throughout. And I'm going to pose a quick question back to both Greg and Steve before opening it up to the audience. We talked about this. But Steve, you've experimented with things like Rise of the Rest with Revolution. And Greg, you've been involved in organizations that fund even nonprofits like New Profit and microlending, small businesses like Oxyon. What have you guys learned from these experiences in terms of encouraging non-traditional geographies or people to actually be social entrepreneurs themselves?
Well, Rise the Rest is started about a decade ago to invest in cities around the country that don't get much venture capital. In the last decade, 75% of venture capital has gone to basically 3 tech hubs: Silicon Valley, New York City, and the Boston area. The rest of the country has basically been left out. Most states, including big states, get 1% of venture capital. California gets 50% of venture capital. So good for California, and particularly good for Silicon Valley. Kind of bad for the rest of the country because startups create most of the jobs, drive most of the economic growth, and if you don't have new companies starting in these places, you just have old companies being disrupted in these places. We shouldn't be surprised that we wake up and a lot of people in a lot of parts of the country feel left out and left behind, and economies are struggling. So that is an attempt to reverse it. And some of it is investing, and we've now invested in 200 companies, 100 different cities, so we're venture capitalists investing in the companies. But in some ways, that's the easy part. The two things that are harder is winning the battle for talent. A lot of the places have seen people leave, a brain drain, to go to other places where there was more opportunity. How do you slow the brain drain of people leaving and create a boomerang of people returning? And a cultural issue where a lot of places are kind of risk averse, and they hear an entrepreneurial pitch. They don't focus on why it might go right. They focus on why it might go wrong. And that culture around risk taking, I think, is where Silicon Valley has been particularly strong. My last point on risk, though, I'd say entrepreneurs are generally associated with taking risk. Entrepreneurs hate risk. They spend most of their time de-risking. They say, here's the mountain I want to climb, here's the battle I want to fight, here's the company I want to build, here's the change I want to see, and then identify a path to get there and spend a ton of time just trying to kind of take the risks out of the way, take the bottlenecks out of the way, take the barriers out of the way. So it's not like we love risk. We love changing things, and part of that is being willing to take it on. But taking it on and sustaining that usually means figuring out ways to de-risk.
Just quickly, Oxyon Opportunity Fund is a CDFI, and it's the largest nonprofit microlender to small businesses in the country, and I've been fortunate to be chair of the board. And I would say we've gone from nothing 7 years ago to lending $200 million a year to small businesses serving underserved small business owners, primarily women and people of color. And we had a leadership vacuum at the company. It was kind of stalled, and brought in a mid-career, wonderful executive named Lou Zarrutia, who has transformed the organization. And she was a banker, probably the last place you'd think of you'd find an entrepreneur. But I guess the only point I'd make is social entrepreneurialism is not limited to young graduates, young entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, it can be a second or third or fifth or seventh career, and not just running nonprofits or social entrepreneurs, but also funding them, being mentors, being advisors. There's a big ecosystem that has formed, and that's been what has been for me a lot of gratification being able to participate in that ecosystem. So I'm going to turn it over to any questions in the audience, and if you could stand and say your name and your question. If anybody you want to address in particular, great. If not, I'll take it and then field it here. So I'll go back in the back row there. Yep. Thanks.
Hi everyone. Thanks for talking. My name is Long, class of 15. In building organizations, super exciting to get people into the mission, what's going on. And then there's a point that I've been running to where people problems become a thing. How do you all think through people problems? How do you think through motivating individuals to be aligned with your mission? Anyone can take this.
Anybody? Eric, go ahead.
We spend a lot of time on people problems, and I think as you grow, that becomes more of what you spend time doing. You spend less time talking to your clients, your funders, your partners outside your organization, and more time talking to each other about your own issues. Because our organization's worked internationally, we're also dealing cross cultures, which is hugely challenging. In the before times, before Trump came to office, we're running programs in a couple of dozen countries, having offices there and dealing with local laws and local labor laws and local cultures. And so what some people find to be offensive, other people find to be normal, or what some people think should be illegal, other people don't think should be. So a lot of making an organization successful, I'm sure in any environment, is getting people on the same page and getting people to spend less time complaining or finding problems with each other and more time, on the common mission. So I think a lot of it is trying to set the tone that we're all here for the same reason. We're committed, we're hardworking, and our diversity is a strength. And that's always going to be hard, particularly in a growing organization, and particularly, in a diverse one. But a very, very important part of building a successful organization is getting everybody on that same mission, I think.
I'd encourage you to flip it. Instead of thinking people problems, think of people opportunities. Because my experience is nothing gets done unless you have a team doing the work. You can do very little on your own. So in some ways, the most important skill, and it's certainly where I've always, particularly when I was running AOL, I went from dozens of people to 10,000 people. I spent most of my time on people issues, making sure you're getting the right people, focusing on the right things, working together in the right ways. You got that working, like anything's possible. If that's not working, nothing is possible. So it is hard. It's frustrating. People are weird. They're motivated in different ways. Sometimes they're counterintuitive. But ultimately, you can't be successful, I'd say, in anything unless you kind of build that, that skill, and also build goodwill and trust with people. Things get done when people trust each other, whether it be a business deal or congressional legislation, and they don't get done if they don't trust people. And that's not about an algorithm. That's about, kind of relationships.
I agree with Steve, and just a quick comment would be, I think it's not easy when you're an entrepreneur because you use all that liberal arts education and you're able to figure out, how do I marry neuroscience with, words in English and then coding and design, and you do a lot of it yourself at first or with a couple people, and the people issues aren't a thing because you're just building. But that's a different part of your brain. And then when you flip to being a CEO, my best mentors have always said the same things. Like, your job is to drive alignment, and you've got very disparate kinds of people that think very differently. The salesperson's very different than the engineer, but you have to help them empathize with each other and bring them together. And that's changed a lot post-COVID with all remote, but people are still people, and you learn a new skill for how to help intrinsically inspire people, like Steve said earlier.
I'm going to call on Steve and Steve Lewis. We talked about Williams and the opportunities it offers all of us. And I think, and Steve Lewis, for me, is one of the reasons that I love this place as much as I do, and how impactful you were on my education. And it's people like Steve and faculty here that make this place tick and succeed. So thank you.
And I want to second that about Steve Lewis. Me too.
I'm going to switch in a different way, and the problems of the current administration, the current political climate have come up. And speaking of climate, if you're trying to do something about environmental justice or climate justice, it seems to me that is two words that divide enormously. And you've all spoken about bringing people together and building bridges, which I totally agree with. But how about taking on that very tough one when you've got an administration in Washington that is saying, we don't want this justice stuff, and we don't want to talk about the environment because the environment is fine and climate change is not as a Chinese hoax.
Yeah, it is a bit of a crazy time to be creating a climate justice organization, but I am very, very lucky to be based here in Massachusetts doing that sort of work. We're primarily state funded through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, so in terms of funding, that's looking all right for us. And what we're really doing is pretty bipartisan at heart. We are a place-based organization, and we work with environmental justice, rural, and gateway students. So we're providing work opportunities, to be honest, to places that have economic development issues. There is conversation about out-migration and brain drain, and places like the Berkshires are really hurting in terms of those things. So in terms of bringing people together, the Berkshires is a perfect place for our pilot programs that is going to be kicking off next year, because it's a community that gets it. They understand there are environmental issues that are happening right here. They see it, they live it, they feel it. And they also see the out-migration, the brain drain, the aging workforce, the need for more electricians in the area, more plumbers who are retiring every single day. So I guess my answer is I'm able to do that because of leaders like Maura Healey, people who are here in Massachusetts doing the good work in government.
Okay, thanks. Go here and then to Bart.
Hi, well, thank you all for your time. I'm Brett Walter, class 75. I'm a fellow social entrepreneur. When Donald Trump took us out of the Paris Agreement the first time, I said, oh shoot, I have to do something. So I created an organization called Climate Action Now, and I created the leading app for citizen advocacy on climate, trying to bring about systemic change. So that's, my question relates to citizen advocacy. How important is it, and how does it matter to you? And it's a softball question, because you all say it's important. So I want you to think more deeply about it. How does it, what do you really think about it? Is it a pain in the ass? How does it fit in the larger context of the things that you do? And I know it's going to be different for all of you, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Anybody want to start?
I think Lani's doing this as part of her job, but the latest company that I co-founded is called Synapticure, and I get a lot less of the credit for this one because my friend has had ALS for 9 years, and his wife is his caregiver, is now our CEO, Brian Wallach and Sandra Apravaya. And they have a great movie on Amazon called No Ordinary Campaign for Love and Life. And it's a great watch. Most of these documentaries are just really sad. This one will make you cry, but it's uplifting too because of the power of citizen advocacy and connecting what they've done. Brian was a year into his disease. He was working his tail off as a trial lawyer at Skadden, and he was really unhappy because he knew he was dying, and yet he was still able to do things. He's like, I just got to earn as much money as possible, Jay, before I'm too sick. And I said, well, you know you're going to die. Let me tell you a story about a guy I met when I was study abroad from Williams at Cambridge. His name was Stephen Hawking. He almost ran me over on the sidewalk. Not a joke. And I asked him if we could have coffee. And, you know, I don't know him well. I knew him. He was an amazing guy while he was alive. But the main thing I took away from our very short conversation for coffee was that he was just still alive for so long because he was so passionate about what he did. And he wanted people to think differently about the universe. So for Brian, he thought about that story, and I gave him a bunch of ideas, like, you know, you worked for President Obama, you're an amazing advocate, you know legislation, you could do advocacy work with the government, you could start a nonprofit for people with ALS and neurodegenerative disease. We could work on a teleneurology business together, I could help you. We could do a biotech. There's all kinds of things you could do. He decided he wanted to do all of those, and he did them all, and he's still doing them all. It's pretty remarkable. So IMLS got $10 billion in funding for ALS, and they got all but one congressperson to vote for it, everyone in the House, and all but one senator. And they did it by going around to people with ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, and getting their voices heard, and there was not a Republican or Democratic senator that could say no to that, and hearing those stories. So applaud what you're doing. I also want to applaud something that Greg mentioned earlier that I'm curious about and really a huge fan of. I think the US kind of messes this up a little bit, where we tell everybody to race to retire when you're 65 and then peace out of work. And you know, more power too if you've earned it, and it's great. But you know what one of the fastest ways to get dementia faster is like piecing out and not engaging in the world and working. And I think it's freaking awesome when people like do it the second time, third time, or when their kids are grown up and they say, I'm going to take all this wisdom and a pile of energy and I'm going to like work on hard problems. So thanks, Eric and Steve and Greg, and for what you're doing too. But what do you think, others, about citizen advocacy?
I'm thinking about what Steve said about building trust and credibility. And yes, we need good leaders in government to make things sustainable and move, and leadership within founders and organizations, but we also need people who can trust leadership to be vulnerable with their stories and to tell people that they are hurting right now and there are problems in communities that need to be solved. That's really how all of my work started. We went around, spoke to other teenagers, and found climate anxiety is a real issue. And especially in rural communities, students are not feeling supported. And teachers are overwhelmed. That's a huge issue within the Berkshires as well, in terms of student support through educators just feeling so overburdened. So we found a real gap by surveying the community. So I think citizen advocacy is super important. It's really at the center of what we do, and I'm sure everybody here knows that there's some person or group that really moves you each day to keep doing what you're doing.
Great. Given time, I'm going to get into the rapid fire. Time for 2 or 3 more questions, and we'll give a rapid response and keep it going. Bart, a fellow very successful social entrepreneur.
Thank you all. This has been incredibly inspiring. You guys are combining hope, incredibly hard work, creativity, and building hope for others and change. At a time when we're really thinking about American democracy, Eric, I'd love if you gave us an example of a win that you're really proud of from elsewhere in the world, and where we should be looking to learn from others.
We should learn from others. Yeah. Well, one question that I've been part of this democracy promotion community of Americans traveling around the world for a number of years, and one question that we're always asked is, why aren't you doing it here in the U.S.? You know, why are you just focused on trying to improve democracy in other countries? We've been criticized as both talking too much about, how great American institutions are, selling American political system around the world, and also ignoring the U.S. The first one was never true. We were always humble about the U.S., recognizing that our political system and our traditions and institutions are idiosyncratic at best, and certainly flawed, probably. And therefore, we were always trying to draw lessons and get expertise from other democracies, from other emerging democracies, from other countries where people are struggling to build democracies. But we didn't ever focus on the U.S. We didn't ever try to learn lessons from successful people engaging in resisting authoritarianism, overthrowing bad governments, developing new political systems. For the reasons of the way we were funded and the way that we operated as a community, we didn't focus on the U.S. So it's important that we do that, and it's important that we try to take lessons that we've learned from other places where, you know, there are a lot of political systems that have done better than the U.S. has done at dealing with polarization, at dealing with money in politics, at dealing with all kinds of political problems. And there are lots of ideas we can get from other countries that we can bring back to the U.S. and try to make changes here. So I've been involved with a bipartisan group. I think the important point Jason made earlier about working with people that you don't always agree on everything and you might see the world differently, to try to do that, to try to bring lessons from the experience of other countries who are resisting authoritarianism or building new political institutions to try to do some reforms in the U.S. People don't necessarily know that the U.S. is the only country in the world that runs its elections with partisan officials. We're the only country in the world that elects our election officials. In most states, it's called the Secretary of State, and it's a elected official that endorses candidates and has to run for office. No other democracy does that. So we're doing things like that, just trying to get codes of conduct into election administration and ultimately change the way we organize elections in this country and organize the way we draw constituency boundaries. Some of those things are long-term, and so we have to both meet the moment and know that we're in a long-term struggle.
That's great. Thanks. Time for one or two more here.
So this is going to be sort of a different question. I'm Breland. I'm from the class of 2020. Hi, Adriana. Good to see you doing cool stuff. My question's for Dr. Langheier. I'm a science major. I took my 3 Div 2 classes, and that was it. So you've used a lot of words that I don't know. My question is sort of, as someone who's also in science, like, how did you go from the point of seeing a problem in science and how the science is being communicated and like taken into effect in the country? How did you get from there to like doing something totally new and like actually trying to do something about it outside of medicine and outside of the scientific establishment?
Yeah, well, this is a great place for science. I spent a lot of time in Bronfman. I might have been accused of sleeping over in the basement a couple of times doing my experiments. But profound experiences here, working with Steve Zottely, and then so many other wonderful places and mentors just in the wet lab and other spots. But when I was doing an internship in high school in an emergency room in Lackawanna, New York, I had this emergency room doc that I really admired. He was so cool. It was my first time really getting patient exposure. And a 4-year-old boy came in. He'd been run over by a drunk driver. And the team and the physician couldn't save him. It was the first time I'd seen someone die like that. Very vivid memory. And this guy that had taken me under his wing as like a 17-year-old was so upset. And he said, "You should never be a doctor. You should go train to be an engineer or go into public health and figure out how to fix the system, because this kid should never be here. And I don't even have the tools I didn't have the tools to save him. But I bet we could have figured that out." And that was really profound, because like somebody you admire and you like, and it's your first experience. The brain remembers the first one. And it kind of colored my lens on medicine so long. And then it made me ask all these doctors and scientists that I was talking to, "Do you love what you do? like, what do you think of the field? And if you ask, you know what they'll tell you? Well, geez, let me tell you how crappy science is these days, and it's crumbling. Well, in these days, it kind of is a tough show. And let me tell you how medicine isn't what it used to be, and but it's probably like that in every field. There's the good and the bad. And when I went to Cambridge, and again, huge thanks to Williams for facilitating things like this, I got exposure to medicine and science as a med student in England, and it's very different than the US, more public health oriented, whatever. That stuck with me. So it's just this kind of compounding effect of constantly loving science and loving what I learned in neuroscience here and biology and even chemistry and physics. But then thinking like, what's wrong with the pace of innovation? And Mayo Clinic talks about how they want to take things that, it usually takes 17 years for basic science innovations to land in the clinic and actually affect human beings. And they say they want to take it down to 1 year. And I think that's what digital health, social entrepreneurial endeavors are for. It's, hey, you can combine technology and the internet and now AI and all the next innovations. And from a almost social justice perspective, those human beings, especially poor people on Medicaid or minorities that can't get access to things, just because of this time gap, this delta between rich people who can get the innovation faster, we're trying to, with these companies, compress the time gap. And so it's just driven from this idea that like, how do we do what we're doing with higher velocity and higher quality, which is also an engineering mantra, and how do we get it out to people faster? And it's just that drive. But again, back to liberal arts, I'll end with that. Like, that's what was so cool. I mean, I got into Harvard MIT, amazing med school program, and I didn't go. It's not because it's amazing. But my best friend from high school, I was wrestling with where to go, and I ended up going to Duke, which is amazing too. But he said, you know, Jay, if you've never lived in the South, and I know you're really passionate about child obesity because it affects a lot of people, and nobody gets pushed into going into primary care anymore to fix these kind of problems, they all get pushed into neurosurgery. And I know you want to be a neurosurgeon in your neuroscience, but you should come to the South, and you should try to understand what the heck is going on with the public health aspects of this, and then think about how to apply science and neuroscience to behavior change for kids. And you know, he was my best friend, so I listened to him. And he was right. There's other ways to apply science to the biggest problems. And that's the other last thing about liberal arts. I feel like I enjoyed my philosophy and religion classes here, and they really make me think about where do I spend my time? And you know, sometimes it's like overwhelming at different transition points in your life, like after school, what the hell am I gonna do? But it doesn't really matter. Write down on a napkin all the things you love, write down all the things about science you love and other classes you took here and what makes you think, apply a moral code and try to do good stuff for people, and you'll figure out that you can do a lot of amazing things and you don't have to just go to the beaten path.
Great. In our last few minutes, 5 minutes, divided by 5 means you each have 1 minute. A parting thought for our friends here after listening to this conversation. Lani, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your first question about what social entrepreneurship means to me, and I'm bringing it back to when I was a student here at Williams. I studied English and political science, focused on creative writing and the international track in political science, and I feel like creative writing taught me how to create something. I would take my observations of the world and make it into something that I could share with others. And political science and international relations, my professors there taught me, this is how the world is. Everything is artificial. Everything is man-made. We are in systems and institutions because they were created by humans that thought it should be such. And so for me, I'm thinking about social entrepreneurship and everything that I've learned at Williams as the world is what you make of it. And as a social entrepreneur, that is my job to figure out how I want the world to look like and what is my part in shaping it that way and making it better so that others can live better as well.
Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I told you about the terrible experience that our organization's been going through, and we're a global organization, there's people around the world, and all these people that are working for us, this is a good job for them. Many of them are working in tough economies where there aren't a lot of great options for them, and having a job with an international organization with it's a particularly good salary and a particularly secure kind of thing, and it all fell apart. So all these people, this is hundreds of people, have lost their jobs. Their prospects are really questionable. What they're doing, I mean, we talk a lot about losing our work and our jobs, but what they were doing was valuable and important, and they believed in, and they've lost the opportunity to continue sort of doing good work in their countries. And you would think that they would be, really bitter and upset. And almost to a person, they were understanding, patient. I got notes from, as the head of this organization, I got notes from people all over the world, many of whom I'd never met, but that work for our organization, that said, I hope you're doing okay. You must really feel bad about this, that you're under a lot of stress and pressure. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Can I volunteer to help get things going again? I would always, take what the spirit and the morale that we had with me, and I'd be ready to come back anytime. And it made me feel really good about who we worked with and what we did. And I think that, one of our main accomplishments over the years has been, finding young people, giving them opportunities, and sort of launching them into politics and public service in their country. So that's, what I feel best about.
Thank you. Adriana?
I think one of the things that I've been reflecting on these last 5 years, which I understand is not that long of time. It's my first reunion. But I still reflect, and I thought a lot about, how did I spend these 4 years? How have I spent these last 5? Like the 4 being in Williams and then the 5 being out. And I realized that, one, I already had an untraditional path out of Williams. That was pretty obvious. But I learned to be very grateful for that. Don't ask me like 2020, 2021 if I felt that way, but now I can appreciate it. And I think the older you get, or like at least even for me, I realize I am drawn to safetyness, even though that sounds a little silly now, because you would think I would want to be in a safer place, but I've kind of accepted uncertainty and like risk, and that has been the biggest advantage that has come to fruition for me currently, in terms of like I have a lot of clarity in what I want to do, I have a direction, and I'm no longer afraid to fail. I like failure. I think it forces me to grow, and it forces me to pursue things in a new, distinct way. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to share, or just like share again from like this reflection point, is that there are ways to bring about new experiences, and even if you need to experiment with how can I fail safely, like I think Williams, like maybe it could be taking that class, right? Like, oh, okay, let's see if I do well. If not, it's one course. I could even pass fail it or something. It gets harder the more you're away from that environment. And so bringing people together to have that opportunity to fail together or do something different, be silly, I think you'll grow a lot from that, and you'll see that it's fun and you can get closer with people. And so that could be translated to founding something together, but you could start with hobbies. Like, I think the point is to just be uncomfortable again. Like, I think that's one of the biggest value adds that I've had during my time here, and it's something that has pushed me forward in this space, but beyond that too.
Right. And Jason, and a reminder that we're the only things that stand between our friends and their class dinners, so.
All right, so take about 30 more minutes. My closing thought would just be to encourage all of you to consider being a social entrepreneur if you have the time and space in your life. If your loved ones and your children are healthy and you feel like you have time and you have fire in the belly, think about using all those skills you've acquired from Williams and everything since Williams that probably Williams helped you with as well. And then if you decide to go do something, find mentors. Williams alumni, there's a lot of good folks, but probably throughout your whole life, but seek them out and talk to them. Learn about AI. Don't just, ignore it. Like, it's a tool. Ask yourself how you could use it. And if you're not fired up about a problem, but you're just generally fired up because there's a lot of problems, take a look at those problems, take a look at what's shifting with what's being pulled back in terms of government funding, and try to look into the future and ask, like, if you don't do something, who will? And sometimes we tell ourselves, like, well, someone will take care of it, and not always, or at least not for a while. And it's amazing how much impact anybody can have, but so grateful for all the opportunities that I've had ever since Williams, and for all the mentors, investors, counselors, and wish you all Godspeed in trying to have a great impact on everything that's to come in this world.
Thanks.
So two quick thoughts. One is, it's been said, much is given, much is expected. We've all been given a lot at Williams. We've been given a tool set and a network and so forth. So on a lot of these issues, including some of the current political challenges, I'd encourage everybody to take a step back and try to understand what's causing this. You know, half the country thought everything Biden did was wrong. Half the country now thinks everything Trump's doing is wrong. There's some nuance there that gets lost in the shuffle. So, you know, take a step back and try to be kind of less about talking about the problem and more about trying to be part of the solution, which I think we've been uniquely trained to do. And last, maybe a little bit of optimism. I was the chair of the Smithsonian for a number of years, and we were working on the 250th anniversary, which is next year. America turns 250 next year. And it was a good for me to take a step back, because it's a reminder that 250 years ago, America itself was just a startup. It was just an idea, and a pretty fragile idea that, almost like most startups, failed, and most people around the world expected it to fail. But somehow it stumbled through those first couple of decades, and then ended up leading the way in the whole agricultural revolution, and the whole industrial revolution, and the whole technology revolution. It went from this fledgling startup that was supposed to fail to, you know, leading economy, leader of the free world. And so hopefully we can address some of these issues, figure out ways to improve our democracy, build on the strength we have, build on the momentum we have. And I think it's people at Williams who have that background, that experience, that perspective, that, as I said, that network, who can help make sure there is a next 250 years, and it's even better than the last 250 years.
That's a great note on which to end. Thank you.